Okay, geweldig. So today is Chav Ches Av, and it is also the yahrzeit of some very famous people. It's the yahrzeit of the Netziv, of Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who was the father of a Chaim Berlin, and he's also the father of Meir Bar Ilan, for whom the Bar Ilan University is named after. I wonder who's prouder, the Volozhiny Yeshiva or the Bar Ilan University.
Bava is like because Berlin became Bava.
I wonder if that's where it came from.
So. It sounds like it.
I guess for a Jewish institution, Bar Ilan is better than Berlin. So there's a very famous story with the Netziv. And the Netziv, he married the daughter of Rabbi Itzel of Volozhiner, meaning the granddaughter of Rabbi Chaim Volozhin married. And he got married at a young age of about 14. And the story goes that he used to learn in private, quietly, and he wrote his Hemek. I think he wrote the Hemek Shiltus he wrote during that period of time. He wrote a beautiful Sefer of Chumash called the Hemek Dover, which everybody enjoys. And his father-in-law discovered once a whole bunch of correspondence that he had with Gedolei Hador. And he looked at it and he realized, like, wow, I didn't realize what an unbelievable Talmud my son-in-law was. And he right away made him say a shir in the yeshiva. When his father-in-law passed away, he became the Rosh Yeshiva with the Volozhin Yeshiva. But how did he get started? As a child, he wasn't interested in learning. And he was a troublemaker. And what happened is one day as a young boy, he's in bed, and he hears his parents talking, and the shoemaker of the city, of the village, was there, and they were discussing that once he becomes bar mitzvah, they're going to pull him out of yeshiva, and they're going to send him to be an apprentice shoemaker, because he doesn't seem to really have a knack for learning. He's not really seeing much bracha in his learning. He's not really interested. So at least he'll be a good shoemaker. And then when the Netziv heard this as a little boy, he came out and told his father, please give me one more chance. I promise, if you let me stay in learning, I promise I will use my time and I will work on myself to be the max. And it turns out that he said at the end of his life, could you imagine, he said, if I would have become a shoemaker and Lachem Ne'eveshim, I would come up to Shemaim and they would show me a whole set of Sforim, the Hamak Dover and all my other Sforim that I wrote. They would say, where are your Sforim? I would say, what are you talking about? I'm a shoemaker. Why would I have Sforim? But really, they would have been demanding of me what my potential was, had I not fulfilled my potential. So today is also the yahrzeit of Rabbi Avram HaKoyin Pam. Rabbi Pam Zatzal. Rabbi Pam was a very unique person. He was extremely, extremely humble. And I just want to share one interesting story about him. Now we know his son, Rav David Pam, is a Rav here in Toronto. And Rav Moshe Reichman, Tzadik Baruch, used to daven in Zichron Shneur, used to daven by Rav David Pam. One day, Moshe Reichman was in his office, and he gets a call. The secretary answers the call. And the secretary says, he said, I'd like to speak to Moshe Reichman. And the secretary said, may I tell Mr. Reichman who is calling? So Rabbi Avram HaKoyin Pam, the God Lador, tells the secretary, please tell Mr. Reichman that Rabbi Pam's father is on the line. Because his son was the Rav to Moshe Reichman. So he didn't say Rav Pam's on the line, say Rav Pam's father's on the line, to minimize who he was. Okay, we got up to the Mishnah yesterday, but we didn't fully understand what the Gemara was telling us. So let's just do a quick review of what we learned. We were learning that if you sell a merchatz, what would be included, what accessories are included, what aren't included. And right at the top of Daf Samach Ches Amud Aleph, the Gemara tells us, V'im Omer Loi, Beis HaMerchatz, V'chol Tashmishav. The V'chol Tashmishav is a very inclusive type of language. We had Beis HaMerchatz by itself. We had Beis HaMerchatz, the Chol Masha B'Soicha, which would even be even more inclusive. And then we had a third nusach of Beis HaMerchatz, the Chol Tashmishav, which is the most inclusive of them all. Kula and Mechurin, everything is included. I believe it even includes the brechos, could be. Let's see what it says. It will even include the brechos, that's right, and the oitru shel eitzim. It even includes the tubs of big water, tanks of water, and the wood, which really we said is not so directly related to America. Everybody needs fuel. America needs fuel as well, but everyone needs fuel. Everybody needs water. So it's not so connected to the merchats as other accessories. Nevertheless, the lotion of the Chol Tashmishav is so inclusive that it includes that as well. And then the Gemara led into some stories to probe into how inclusive really is the expression of the Chol Tashmishav. And the Gemara shares the following story. So the brayso we just quoted was Beis HaMerchatz Chol Tashmishav. Now let's see how the Chol Tashmishav of this highly inclusive lotion would impact the sale of a Beis Abad. So he said Beis Abad Chol Tashmishav ani Merchalach, and at the Hanin Chanvasa Avroi, there were some stores that were right around this Beis Abad. They used to spread out sesame seeds, dry out to prepare for squeezing them for oil. And also the Kamed Rabbi Yosef. They came to Rabbi Yosef to find out, are these stores included? Rashbam tells us the primary purpose of these stores was to sell wine and bread, but they also were used a little bit in preparation of the oil. Amalei. So Rabbi Yosef said, we have a similar case by Beis HaMerchatz. Let's apply it here as well. Tanina im Amar Beis HaMerchatz l'chol tashmishav ani marchalach. Everything even remotely related, like wood and vats of water, are included. So therefore, here too, when you use the inclusive lotion of l'chol tashmishav, it should include even those stores that are there. Amalei Abaye said, but we have a brayso that might say otherwise. Latani Rab Chia ain't kula mechurin. The lotion of Chol Tashmishav does not have such an inclusive connotation in reference to Beis Abad. Zok to Gemara El Amar Rabashi. So Rabashi comes up with the final psak as to how to deal with this case of somebody who said Beis Abad Chol Tashmishav. Chazinon we see as follows: I Amar Le Beis Abad Chol Tashmishav. If he says Beis Abad Chol Tashmishav, and the Ilam Mitzarno, and this is the perimeter, Kani or Kani, Bilay Loy Kani. So let's look at the Rashbam exactly how he describes this V'alin Matrina. So let's have a look at the Rashbam. Amar Rabashi, Chazinan the Amal Beis Abad B'chol Tashmishav, V'alin Mitzanu, V'hani B'chlal, Hani Mitzrani Kanu. So if you say Beis Abad V'chol Tashmishav with one inclusive language, and then another thing, the Ilam to know these are its perimeter, V'hani B'chlal, and this particular store was within that perimeter that the seller describes, then Hani B'chlal, Hani Mitzrani, they're included Kanu. So let's get clarity in what exactly is included when he says each statement. V'suga the Shemites. Dr. Rashbam, let's do a roundup of what we have over here. Hachi is as follows. Hachi, this is how the chips fall. The Kaimalon Rabashi. So this is the Maskana. The Maskana is this last comment of Rabashi, which we're now going to have to drill down and decipher. The Kaimalon Rabashi do Basra. Rabashi is the latest of the Maraim in this discussion, so we pass like him. And this is what we learn from Rabashi. Bizman she'omer lei beis hamerchatz v'chol masha b'soichei ani mocher. So that's the inclusive language, but it's not very inclusive. Af al pi she'meitzer loi mitzorim hachitzayim. Even though I pointed out to him the outer perimeter of the area of which I am selling, loi kana brecha shel mayim, that would not include the big vats, tanks of water, Uloy base kinus eitzim, and it would not include the wooden sheds, the wood sheds, even if they are within that perimeter that he showed. The kaimalon, because we have an assumption that we learned earlier in the parak of mitzarim hirchiv. When someone is describing a property that he's selling and he outlines its perimeter, sometimes he'll go bigger than what's actually included in the sale for ease of description, right? We had that concept before, which would apply equally over here. If he said, even though the perimeter that he outlined on the survey included those items, nevertheless, they're not included. We call that mitzarim here. So the Chol Tashmishav is a more inclusive language, and and he also gave them the outline of the perimeter on a survey. And these items are within that perimeter, Harei and Mechurin. Even though you didn't say the words, the Alin Mitrana. So the Rashbam is learning in our sugya, Va'alon Mitrana, it simply means you gave him a survey with the perimeter outline. But you didn't say those words, Va'alon Mitrana. You just said the Chol Tashmishav, and you gave him a survey. They do have some connection to Beis Abad. You do need fuel and you do need water to operate. I'm sorry. We're talking about Beis Abad. We're talking about the store. The store is somewhat related to the Beis Abad. Why? Because you're drawing shumshum in there. V'yavagav the Amr Le'il B'Reish Perkin Mitzarim Hirchavloi. Isn't there an argument that sometimes he'll provide a larger perimeter than what's actually included in the sale because it's easy to describe it that way? Hacha, when you added the words V'chol Tashmishav Lo Yamrin Hachi, we don't say that it was Mitzarim Hirchavloi. The Chivin Dechazi Lahach Bayis Tzas Letashmish Beis Abad. Since this little store does in some small way work together and services the Beis Abad, and v'hu b'soicha meitzar, and it's also within the perimeter that you outlined in that survey, vaday machur. So the Rashbam is saying there's a two-pronged reason why it's included in the sale. A, it was within your perimeter. There's a svar of Mitzarim Hirchavloi. You don't say that when you also added the inclusive language of V'chol Tashmi. You know why? When he showed the perimeter, he included that store because he wanted to include it when he said V'chol Tashmi. That is how the Rashbam learns. Now, the problem with this Rashbam is in the earlier part of the parak, the Rashbam says Beferish. The Rashbam says Beferish, and we'll look it up, that the only way to counteract the svar of Mitzarim Hirchavloi is if you actually speak out the actual words. If you actually speak out the actual words of the Ilan Mitzrano. It's not just including that in the perimeter, but it's actually speaking out the Ilan Mitzrano. And we saw that, I believe, on Dav Samach Gimel Amar Aleph, and the Gemara says at the top of Samach Gimel Amar Aleph, he was explaining Abaye's words. And this was speaking about a case where Reuven has a piece of property and his eastern border is Levi. And he decides to sell the east side of his property. So when he tells the buyer the borders of the property that he wants to sell, he tells him, on the east side of the property that I'm selling you, your neighbor will be Levi. And on the right side, on the west side, your border will be me because I'm keeping part of the field to myself. But he didn't clarify precisely how much of the field he was actually selling. So is he selling a tiny little strip, which the east border will be Levi, the west border will be him? Or is he selling half his field, where the east border will be Levi and the west border will be him? It's not clear. So Habaya was explained by Rabbi Yemar as follows. If you say, whether or not you say Meitzer Ira to be not Palga, if you use the word that my land that I'm splitting, or or my land that I'm cutting, that doesn't have an impact on how much I'm giving. But he Omer lay alin mitrina. But if he said these are its borders, anom mitrina palga, then if he said alin mitrina, then palga, that means he's giving half the field, he's selling half the field. But lo yomer alin mitrina, if he didn't speak out these words, these are its borders, then it's Tisha Kavin, he's only giving the bare minimum. So you see, you have to speak out the words ilan mitrina. And if you look at the words of the Rishbam says very clearly, Meitzar Mizrach Ara Demina Palga Meitzer Meir Pliny V'chein Hoylech V'choshev Kol Mitzarim. He does list off the boundaries, and then he speaks out. On top of listing off the boundaries, he also speaks out the words if he already gave you a survey of the boundaries, there's no need to add the additional comment of a alam mitzvah. Adding that additional comment is a yiter aloshoin, and that's why it's inclusive. So here the Rashbam explains that you have to say the words ilam mitzvah, but we just learned the Rashbam in our sugya. And in our story, he doesn't say you need to say Baal Mitrina. So the Rashash points this out as a little bit of a inconsistency in the Rashbam. And the Rashash answers this question quite simply. Over there, that was the only Yiter. But over here, you have the V'chol Tashmisha is also a Yiter. So really, you just need two components. You need that he should show the boundaries, and you need that he should also add an extra lashon. Here, the extra lashon was V'chol Tashmisha. Over there was Baal Mitrina. So since we already have your yiter lashon, you didn't need to add on top of it the extra yiter of alam mitzvah. But in that case, there was no other yiter lashon besides the alam mitzvah, and therefore it was those words that are necessary to be added to the contract to be more inclusive. Okay, beautiful. Now we are up to the next mission. Hamoicher se'ir. So we discussed selling a house. We discussed selling chatzar. We discussed selling a merchatz. We discussed selling a Beis Habad, and now we're discussing selling a whole city. Okay? Hamoicher se'ir. If one sells a whole city, Machar bottom, the houses in the city are included. Boirais, Shichin, and Ma'arais. Those are included. Those are even included if you sell a chatzar, we learned. According to the Tanakama, Merchatzois, any bathhouses, the Shoifchois, any place where birds that built a birdhouse, Beis Habaden, if there's a press in the city, that's included. Ubeis HaShalochin, which we will see in the Gemara what that means. Let's just say it's a type of field. Avoloi esa metaltlin. It does not include metaltlin. The metaltlin are not included if you have animals, if you have hidivisari, if you have bicycles. Those are not included in the sale of the city. However, ubizman sharmalahi chomasha besoicha afilu hayeba behema v'avodim, which are the least connected to the city. Even food you would leave there, and we're going to make a distinction because food doesn't move on its own. But avodim and behema move on its own, so you might want to take it with you. Even that is included. And we learned a couple of blot ago, the Rishbam explains why. Because when you're selling a city, it means you're moving far away. If you're moving far away, the less you schlep with you, the better. You'd rather just carry cash with you and buy everything new in the place that you arrive. But we learned if you're moving out of a chutzner, there you're also leaving a lot of things because you don't want to schlep everything out of the chutzner to a new chutzner because you're moving to a new neighborhood. So you also take some things with you, but not as many. And if you're just moving from house to house in a chutzner and you're only selling a house, there you're going to keep most of the things with you because it's not such a big challenge to move everything. But Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer, HaMoicher es ha'ir, Mocher es a center. If whoever sells a city includes in it the center, again, we're going to have to see what that means. There's a multiple way machloikis to determine what these things are, and the Gemara is going to flush it out now. Amalei Reb Acha, Bared Rav Avia. Let's see if we should peek into the Rashbam on the Mishnah, just to give us a little bit of a perspective. So let's see the Mishnah. It's the first wide line in the Rashbam. Machar is a batim, the batim bechlal here. in the cities included the homes. The Mishnah didn't have to speak out that it includes the flat land. I knew Ikar, like what else would it include if it wouldn't include the actual flat land in the city? The ir mashma aver ir. That's at a bare minimum. Based on shlachin shechutz lir smuchen lir, the based on shlachin that are out of the city and near the city. With the gemara befarish my shlachin what they are exactly. Avalois metalton. What metalton aren't included in the stam a sale of a city? Mani tashmishe, the type of kalim that you use in the city, taner v'kirayim, appliances. V'chol metalton d'la'il, the amran b'huloi mochar. These are all not included. The choshgein chiti v'sari, food is not included that you take with you. But v'afilu hayuba, the Gemara mafarish my afilu. So it says afilu hayuba behema v'avodim. Why is there an afilu for behema v'avodim? Mimach chamur and Yosy mishar metalim. Why would you think behema and avodim are different than any other mobile thing? Limoka b'chlal. Behema v'avodim ein yekroin man tashmishi. Those aren't even considered specific kalim that are used for the city. They're very universal. If they're included in a sale, when you say I'm including all the contents of the city, which are the animals and the avodim are the least likely to be included. So if even those are included, as the Mishnah says, those are metaltlin, but they don't move on their own. They don't move under their own power. But avodim and behemoths, which move under their own power, are the least likely to be included in the sale of a city. And if you have a language that includes them, it will surely include anything else that's not connected. Okay, Zok Tehel Gemara weiter. Omer Le Rav Acha Baredi Rav Avi Rabash. Shmas Mina. What we can gather from here is that Abdo Kimetalpada, and the Eved has the status of metaltalim because the Ikim Karka Dami, if we consider it like Karka, Nizdavin Agav Masa, it should be included in the sale of the city. Now the Rishpah makes something very clear. We're not talking about halachah. Halachically, we know the Torah tells us that Eved has the din of Karka, and you sell it like Karka with Chazaka. That's not the discussion here because that's not up for discussion. That's what the Torah says. The discussion here is a shaila that the Gemara asks where does the Gemara ask? We look at the little Gimel. We'll see where the shaila is discussed. On Daf Kuf Nun, there's a discussion. When I sell karka, do I also include avodim? Because even though avodim are halacha karka, but lamaisa they're not karka. So the stam das of a person when he sells karka, does he actually have in mind to include avodim as well? And that's what our discussion here is as well. What is included? What is the typical person including in the sale? So you should be able to bring a raya from here that a person perceives avodim as metaltlin because it's only included in the sale if you use a highly, highly inclusive language. But otherwise, you wouldn't include it in the sale. But if it was k'mekakadami, by default, it should be included in the sale. So the ika mekakadami nizdavin agav mas. Correct Gemara. So it's going to be better if you conclude that abdos k'metaltlin dami. Ve'elamai abdos k'metaltlin dami. That's also going to be a difficulty. That's also going to pose a difficulty. Looking into the Gimel, ihachi my afilu. It says even avodim and behemoths are included. My afilu. What's the afilu? Zok derashbam. My afilu. The machma afilu avodim she'ein din metaltlin. If the user lashon of afilu, the Mishnah seems to be telling you why afilu. Why would you think that avodim wouldn't be included? Obviously, because avodim are karka. So how could you say that our Mishnah holds avodim k'metaltlin dami from the fact that the Mishnah says afilu on the avodim? What is the chiddush? The chiddush must be that it's karka. Dr. Gemara, elamai islach l'memer. What are you going to be forced to say? Shiny bein metaltlin denayid, metaltlin loynayid. If you're going to say that evidence k'metaltlin dami, what is the afilu? The afilu is, even though it's metaltlin that move on its own, nevertheless, it's still included in the sale. So there's a distinction between metalton like food, which doesn't move on its own, and then there's metalton like avodim that move on its own. So the chiddush is not only are metalton that don't move on their own, not only are they included in the sale of the city, but even things that can move under their own propulsion, like an eved, like a behemoth, that's also included in the sale. So that could be one pshat in the Mishnah. But once you say that, then afilu tema avda k'mekakadami. I can even say avdus k'mekakadami. But so then you're going to ask me a question. So why isn't it included? Because shiny bein mekakad denied lemekakad lo night. You know why an eved wouldn't automatically be considered part of the sale? Because there's a very distinct difference between the karka of eved and standard karka, and that is that an eved moves. So basically, from our Mishnah, you can learn it if you hold Avda Kimatal Dami, but you can also learn our Mishnah just as well if you hold Avda Kimakakim. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, Hamoicher Esair, Mocher Esasent. Correct them on my center. What is this center that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says is included in the sale of a property, of a city? Hacha Tegimoi, here it was explained as Bar Machavnisa. And this is a very important clerk that works for the city, that is required for the operation of the city, and therefore, by default, we would include that when you sell a city, because without the clerk, the city cannot continue operating. And the Rashbam explains, Bar Mechavnisa, Eved Hamamuna Lahagit Ulachvuye Hume Asodosh Shel Mizeh V'Shel Mizeh. It's the person in charge of the surveying office. He knows where everybody's property begins and where everyone's property ends. You can't really operate a city without someone who can verify all that. Whoever, so it's like almost like the land registry. Whoever Lasarir, he works for the owner of the city. So he's a very integral part of the operation of the city. The actually here, and the city can't really operate without him. Okay? The Rabbi Chanal is quoted by the Rashbam as saying it means the shomer. But this clerk is extremely important for the operation of the city. So Zok Shimon Gamliel, by default, that Eved is always included. However, Shimon ben Avtolmus Omer, it means bagi. What are bagi? Bagi are fields. Let's have a look at the Rashbam, what it means. Bagi sodos shesav hamadina. The fields that are around the city, those fields service the city, and they're normally included in the sale of a city, would be the associated fields around the city. Man Amar Bar Mechavnisa. If you hold even a human that's not a piece of property, it's just an accessory, so there's less of a svara that should be included in the sale of a city. Yet if you hold that's what's included, Kolshkin Bagi, surely fields on the outskirts of the city, surely those will be included. But Mandam or Bagi, if you understand Reb Shimon ben Gamliel as saying Bagi means fields, maybe Avobar Mechavnisa Loy Mizdat. Those might not be included. An Eved is a separate item. Sure, he services the city, but he's definitely not as connected to the city as fields surrounding. So that is our shayla. We have a machloikas. What is pshat in Reb Shimon ben Gamliel when he said every mecher of a field, of a city, by default includes the center? What does he mean? Does he mean the fields around it, or does he mean even the city clerk?
There's always an ethic in city clerk.
Correct. Tanan we learned. Unless maybe his new owner gives him a break. I don't know. Tanan we learned. Beis habadim ubeis hashloch. The Mishnah also adds in that beis habadim and beis hashlochin are included in the sale of a city. So what are beis hashlochin? We didn't clarify that earlier, but now we're going to figure out what it means. What are beis hashlochin? Svarua, the first thought was that what is the definition of beis hashlochin? Bagi, it means those fields that a moment ago someone understood that Reb Shimon ben Gamliel was including those fields. That's going to be somewhat difficult because Reb Shimon ben Gamliel is sort of agreeing to the Tanakama. So that's what we're going to be working. Where do you see that Beis Hashlochin refers to fields? It says v'sheleich mayim al pnei chutzos. And the Rashbam explains, what does that mean? V'sheleich mayim al Panech Utzais. Dr. Shom Kaloim Lahagi Nekroin Shlochin. Why are they called Shlochin? They need that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should send them rain to irrigate them. Okay. Now the Rishonim tell us that when it says Beis HaShlochin, we know in fields there's a Beis HaShlochin that require rainwater. There's a Beis HaBaal that has its own source of water. It has a spring within the field. In our Gemara, we're not making that distinction. It just means fields. Why we're referring to all types of fields of Beis HaShlochin, I don't know. But we really mean all types of fields. We don't mean to say Dafka field that needs rainwater. Any field that surrounds the city would be included within the sale of the city. Okay? If you learn that Rab Shimon ben Gamliel was adding the city clerk, it makes sense. Amar Tanakama Bagi Mizdavni. The Tanakama says that the fields associated with the city are included, but Bar Mechavnisa Lai Mizdavin. But the city clerk is not included. The also Rab Shimon ben Gamliel Lamemar, and Rab Shimon ben Gamliel comes to add Afilu Bar Mechavnisa Nami Mizdavin. This clerk is also included. And like we said, the logic is that fields would be included before the clerk. Elamanda or Bagi, but if you have Beis HaShlochin is Bagi, then Rab Shimon ben Gamliel is repeating the same thing that the Tanakama is saying. Tanakama Nami Hochi Ka'amar. The Tanakama is also saying that Bagi are included. So what is Rab Shimon ben Gamliel adding? Zok Gemara, if you're going to learn that Rab Shimon ben Gamliel is adding fields, then we're going to have a different shot in Shlochin. Misavis my Shlochin Bagi, who said that you're interpreting properly the Beis HaShlochin in the Mishnah. Maybe Beis HaShlochin in the Mishnah means something else. Loi, my Shlochin Ginunaisa, gardens. Gardens are more connected to a city than fields, because a city is made to walk through and enjoy. Gardens have the same function. Fields are accessories to a city. That's where they grow their food, but they're not as part and parcel of a city as the gardens. Where do you see that gardens are referred to as Beis HaShlochin? You're sent to a Pardes Rimonim, and why is the word Shlachayich used? The Rashbam explains. Where are we? These are gardens that produce pears all year long. So therefore they're called Shlachecha. They're sending you things. My wife once met Yosy Phillips' mother in LaGuardia Airport. And she was saying, I have a son who lives in Toronto, and because of that, I'm a shikker. Why am I a shikker? Because I'm always shicking. So that's what a shlachayich is. The Ginois are considered shikkers. They're always sending us payers. So Zog to Gemara, if you're going to learn that Reb Shimon Gamliel is adding fields, Beis HaShlochin that the Tanakama includes would be defined as gardens. But the Tanakama holds the fields around the city would not be included. And Reb Shimon Gamliel is also adding fields, but nobody includes the clerk. So that was one way of how this sugya went down. Igud Amri, but there was another version. Svarua, let's assume my shlochin ginunasa. In the first nusach, at first glance, we assume shlochin means field. Now the Gemara is going to come from a completely opposite angle, but with the same logic. What's the pashtus of what shlochin are that the Tanakama include in the sale? Gardens. Zakmar Bishlam Alamand Amar Bagi. Bishlam, if Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, when he said center, he meant fields. There's a coherent conversation going on between the Tanakama and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Tanakama, Ginunai Sam is Davin, Bagi Loim is Davin. The Tanakama says, I include these properties, but not those properties, gardens, but not fields. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, it's not only these types of properties, it's also field type of properties. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel is properly responding on the subject discussed by the Tanakama by adding additional properties. Turning on to the base. Ella, but if you're going to learn Lamanda Omar, Bar Mechavnisa, if Reb Shimon Gamliel is adding a city clerk to the list of items in the purchase of a city, so then they're speaking two different languages. Amar Tanakama Ginunaisa. The Tanakama says gardens are included, and Reb Shimon Gamliel says, no, I also include clerks. He's talking apples. He's talking oranges. It doesn't make sense. If you learn that Reb Shimon ben Gamliel added center, meaning a clerk, based on shlachin that the Tanakama means, maybe it doesn't mean gardens. My shlachin bagi. Maybe shlachin are referring to bagi. But the clerk wouldn't be included. You also Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Meimar tafilu bar mechavnisa nami mizdab, and that would explain his sheet. Let's have a look in the Rashba. Elamad center havi bar mechavnisa. If you hold center is a clerk, ma idin tois v'zu al divrei Tanakama. What in the world? What type of response is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel making to the Tanakama's assertion that it means gardens? The Tanakama Omer Gudunaisim is davni, avol bagi loy is davni. The main comment of the Tanakama is that I don't include all the properties, only the gardens, but not the fields. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that by Bechavnisa Namim is davin, we also include clerks. That's not the discussion here. The discussion here is what type of property are included, gardens or fields. So why is Rabbi Shimon Gamliel responding with something from left field? This is what Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel should have responded to the Tanakama. He should have said, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, Hamoicher Seir, Mocher is Habagi. I agree with the Tanakama about Bagi, but I'm also adding Vesa Center. Center Lechud, since all Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel mentioned in his reaction to the Tanakama's comment, Michlal, it must be the Shme'inu Rabbanon the Besenter Lechud Amri Eine Macher. He heard that the Tanakama said that Dafka Center isn't included, but also and he said that it's included. But the Tanakama wasn't even referring to people; he was speaking about properties. Even the Shlachin Gidunaisa, the Tanakama wasn't trying to make a comment in relation to a clerk. The Tanakama was trying to make a comment in relation to Bagi to say that Bagis are not included, fields are not included, just gardens. It's the Bagi Udamar Rabban Eloim is Davni. So the Gemara answers no. The Tanakama said I include all properties, and Rav Shimon Gamliel says not only are the properties included, the clerks are included as well. So now everything works out well. So the Gemara Tashma. So we had two different ways to explain Rav Shimon ben Gamliel's point of what center is. Does it include a clerk or does it include a field? Tashma, we're going to try to bring a raya to one side. Rabbi Yehuda says center Einei Mocher. That's not included in the sale, but an kolmis mocher. And al kolmis is included. What are these things? Zok to Rashbam and kolmis who sofer hamelech. That's the sofer of the king. Lichtov mispor asados va'abatim va'anoshim. What's the purpose of this? Laseis mas til kolechot lasarair. So there's the clerk who knows the borders of everything. That was the center. And then there's the clerk who's in charge of taxation, which is even more important. So the review said, even though the center is not included, but the person in charge of the property taxes, he is definitely included. Zok Gemara, my love, mida and kolmas gavra. If Rabbi Yehuda is making a comment about an kolmas vis-a-vis a center, we're probably speaking about humans. If the kolmas that Rabbi Yehuda claims is included is a human, center nami gavra. And if that's the case, then we have a raya that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, when he said center, must have meant the city clerk and not Bagi. So you have a kash on the Omer who holds that Pshat in Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's center means a field. Who said? Hachadisa, Hachadisa. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda is talking about two different things. He's saying the center, the fields are not included, but the person in charge of taxation are included. You're right, they're not parallel, but he's giving a list of what's included and what's not. Don't deduce from there that they must both be humans. Frank the Gemara, Umi Matas Amrit Hachi, can you possibly make such an argument that Rabbi Yehuda learns that center means Bagi, meaning Rabbi Yehuda is saying that the fields around the city are not included in the sale? I'll prove to you that that's not what he holds. But Katani Seifa, the Seifa of this very brisa that we just quoted from Rabbi Yehuda adds, Avaloi Shiareha, not the extra areas around, which we'll see what that means. V'loy b'noisel, which Rashbam touches as the little villages around the city, those would not by default be included in the sale. V'loy chorshin hamuksin law, and not forests that open up into the city. V'loy bibrin shel chaya v'shel oivus v'shel dagim, and pens, big fields that are penned in to store and to catch animals, those are not either included in the sale of the city. The Gemara wanted to know, my shiarel, when it said in the Brisa that Rabbi Yehuda says that shiarel are not included in the sale of a city, what are these shiarel? Bizli. They're bizli, not the nash of bizli. My bizli, what are bizli? Omar Rab Abba Piski Bagi. Piski Bagi, remember Bagi are the fields around the city. Piski Bagi are fields around the city, but they're not directly contingent with the city. There's a separation between them and the city. There's some empty land in between them and the city. So they are still lands around the city, but they're not directly connected. So those are more removed than the Bagi that we have been talking about. So the Shiareh are not included, which means they are the fields that are not directly connected to the city. So therefore, we can make a deal. If he's saying, Piski Bagi Misdavni, if Rabbi Yehuda is saying that the only fields that aren't included are the fields that there's land separating them from the city, it would be mashma that Ha Bagi Atom Misdavni. But the fields that are directly connected to the city, those would be included in the sale. But the problem is, you just wanted to say that center, according to Rabbi Yehuda, means fields, and Rabbi Yehuda says about center, Einei. So the Gemara asks, you can't say center means fields around the city, and it's Einei Macher, because the only fields around the city that Rabbi Yehuda excludes are the fields that are not connected to the city, they're further away. But the cities that are directly connected to the city, he would include it in those sales. You're right, we have to flip around the script. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, center Macher, and Kolmas Einei Macher. We have to change Rabbi Yehuda's words. Instead of saying center is Einei Macher, we'll say the center is Macher. The Bagi, the fields right around the city are included in the sale, but then Kolmas, the city taxation clerk, he's not included in the sale. Maybe the buyer will get his own person in administration. Correct the Gemara, when we matzos Amrit, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel really. Well, that means you're telling me that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, because we're learning now that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel holds that a center is a property. And Rabbi Yehuda is now saying that the center property is included in the sale, which is exactly what Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says in our Mishnah, that the center is included in the sale. But you can't say that Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, because I'm going to show you Rabbi Yehuda argues on Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. But Rabbi Yehuda Karabanan Sfirlai. Rabbi Yehuda holds the Karabanan of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, the Katani Sefer. Because you know what the Sefer of this Brisa says? Avoloi Shiarel, Veloi B'noisel. The Ilu Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Amar, Mocher Sayir Mocher B'noisel. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel holds that the B'noisel, the little villages around the city, are included in the sale of the city. Clearly, Rabbi Yehuda disputes that. So Rabbi Yehuda clearly doesn't learn like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. He clearly learns the Karabanan. So if that's the case, how could you say that he agrees with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel regarding the sales of the fields around the cities? The Tanya, where do you see Rabbi Shimon Gamliel includes the villages? The Tanya, a moicher is here, loy mocher is b'noisel, which is the Tanakama. But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, a moicher is here, mocher b'noisel. Zok Gemara, that's not shver. All you prove to me is that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel as far as the villages around the city. But you haven't proven that Rabbi Yehuda argues on Rabbi Shimon Gamliel when it comes to the Shiarel. So Zok Rabbi Yehuda Savar like Kavotze Bechada. He agrees like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel that the Baga are included. And he disagrees by the B'nai Se'ah, by the villages around. That's not fair. These pens would not be included in the sale of a city. Or many fact Banais, which we said are villages around the city, are not included, but the city was partially on the land and partially in the water, and I'm not sure what that means. As the article explained, how do you have a city that's partly in the water? Unless it's the fantasy city of Atlantis, but I don't think that's what it means. How does the article describe a city that's partly in land and partly in the water? Maybe it means Venice. Maybe there's a city with canals, like Lagoon City. Do you see where he says it? How does he describe that? I'm not sure how that city works. Oh, so like Vancouver Island. So that's what it means. Okay. Of the mainland. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. So or and the or Bibrim Shalchayev Shaldogim, which is what we're focused on, Harailim Karmima. That's right. So at the end of the day, we have a stira. One brisa said these pens of animals are not included, and the brisa we just quoted said they are included. If the opening to these pens, the gates that open them, face the city, those would be included with the city. But if the opening to this pen you only access from the outside, those would not be included with the sale of the city. We're talking about forests, which seems to be open wherever they're open, even if they're open to the city. Hamuksin law, even if they're open to the city, it's mashma they wouldn't be included. Maybe hamuksin law doesn't mean it's open to the city; it means it's open away from the city, and therefore that is what the litmus test is on these types of things like pens. If it opens to the city, it's part of the city. And if it's not open to the city, it's not part of the city, even though it's close by. What if you sold a field? So we talked about now bias, chotzer, beis hamechet, beis abad, and now sada. So macheres avonim l'shem l'tzarcha. It includes these stones that are needed, the big boulders that are needed for the operation of property. What type of boulders are needed for the operation of the property? The Gemara explains even though you technically could move these boulders, even the kavi lahai tashmish, since they're needed, I'm not sure exactly what they're for. They meziznaisa. Now I said, you normally don't move them. Okay, it's considered mechuber. Shem l'tzarcha. There's a kondom shebekeren shem l'tzarcha. We already discussed this. In a kerem, you have a lot of posts that you put in, stakes that you put into the ground that will support the vines. And even if they're loose right now, but they're very much used to support the vine, those are included. If there's grain growing, but it still is not harvested yet, that's included in the sale. What if you had an area of reeds growing? It wasn't a huge area, it was less than a raiva. That would also be buckled to the field and be included. There's hashumira. They used to make these little huts out of twigs, but it wasn't a permanent structure with with cement. So that would also be included to buckled to the field. There's a charuv sheini murcha. A charuv is a type of tree. When it's very young, they don't graft into it. Once it gets older, they graft into it. So an older tree is such a expensive, independent item, it would normally not be included in the sale of a field. But if it's still a young sapling, that's included in the sale of the field. Again, the shikma tree, the sycamore tree, grows to be huge, and it becomes an area unto itself. But while it's still young, it's still included in the field. Boulders that are not needed for the field, or posts that aren't needed for the hanging of the vines, or it doesn't include tfua that already is harvested. But if in the contract of sale it was inclusive and it said it includes everything, then everything would be included. Regardless, what's never included is if there's a large area of reeds that are growing, that's very large, that for sure would not be bundled to the field. Or huts that are made much more permanent with tit, those wouldn't be included. A more mature charuv tree would not be included. Sadna shikma and a mature shikma tree would not either be included in the sale. Okay, we'll stop here, Baruch Hashem. We finished Daf Samach Ches, and Be'ez Hashem tomorrow we will learn Daf Samach Tes, Daf 69. Everybody should have an awesome day. Good morning, welcome.